Well, let me talk then a little bit about some of the dynamics that make that model work. One is it really requires some metacognition. That's a fancy term for a person's ability to think about their thinking or to reflect on what it is they're doing. Reflect in the moment, reflect on the moment, and reflect what you're going to do next. And so one of the things that this requires is a great deal of self-regulation, so that you have to self-monitor, you have to know what you're thinking and why you're thinking it, you have to self-evaluate, and you have to self-reinforce your movement towards your understanding of these things. Ruth Ann Kuyper is a doctoral student that I worked with at the University of South Carolina, and she's developed a self-regulation model that builds nicely with this OPT model of clinical reasoning. And she did a little bit of research, and she discovered that she studied people who just graduated from school who were in internship program, making the transition from student to caretaker, RN, real nurse. And what she discovered, she had the students keep logs, and she used a computer program to analyze the logs. And one of the things she discovered was for the first 8 weeks, the students who were going to be nurses could only think about themselves, because they were so anxious about getting down the skills and mastering the system. Something happens magically at week 8. They finally consider the patient, and they take the focus off themselves, and they kind of look at the patient and become more patient-centered. And so I think just being aware that you have those anxieties about your own skill set and your own abilities, and as you become more comfortable, some of this stuff becomes pretty automatic and unconscious, actually, in relationship to the way people operate and the way people think and the way they make sense out of things. The other thing that might be a useful way here is, I think in nursing we sometimes put too much effort on critical thinking. In my world, I talk about foreground-background shifts all the time. And for most of nursing education, critical thinking is in the foreground, and we teach to critical thinking, but what we really want is clinical judgment. And because critical thinking is a means to clinical judgment, and so I like to bring clinical judgment to the foreground and put critical thinking in the background, because that's really the end you have in mind, is you want to be able to make those contrasts, figure out what that criteria is, get those concurrent considerations together, and make a conclusion about what the situation is with that. And we also try, because our focus is on critical thinking in the foreground, we try to break things down into analytic little parts. But the reality is that nursing is about putting pieces together and paying attention to people from a holistic perspective. So my next adventure in terms of my own learning is to learn more about the work of Ken Wilber, who's got an integral model. He talks about being integrally informed and full spectrum activity in an organization. And he has a saying that everyone is right. It just depends on your perspective. And so he's tried to develop this model, which I think fits with complexity because it's embedded in complexity. It's called all quadrants, all lines, all states, all stages. And it has a 4-quadrant model, and in the upper left quadrant is I. It's what you feel subjectively. Lower left is we. Upper right is its, which is the scientific objective part. And then the lower right is its, social systems and the complexity dynamics that we're involved in. And he says you really don't really understand a situation unless you have figured out the I, the we, the it, and the its, and how all of those things are integrated together. And so I think one of the things that complexity-inspired approaches does for you is it helps you appreciate that integration. It helps put things together rather than take things apart, and that is a skill that's necessary, especially in the systems that we operate today, and we're so fragmented. And so complexity-inspired approaches, systems thinking approaches, to be integrally informed is really, I think, the real work of nursing.